All right. Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. You know, we love to do these. We take these amazing sources, and we really, really try to, pull out the most juicy insights. And today we are on episode 39, which means we are getting close to the end of our 50-episode journey with Saadi of Shiraz.
Yeah, and we're so lucky to have these incredible conversations between Dr. Dinani and Dr. Larijani from their show, Marifat. Just as a reminder for everybody, this is a translation, so we just want to give that disclaimer. Some of the details might not be conveyed perfectly, but we're doing our best.
Of course, yeah.
To get those gems across to you.
Well, today we're diving into Saadi's Fable, the Nightingale and the Ant. And now this sounds like, pretty simple stuff, but trust me, there's a lot to unpack here, especially when we start thinking about, like what actually is a good life.
Yeah, this fable, I think, really takes us to the core of, how are we using our time, our energy, and how that even affects our connection to something that's bigger than ourselves.
So let's set the scene a little bit. Imagine this lush garden, flowers blooming everywhere, the nightingale singing its heart out, just completely lost in the beauty of the moment, and then you've got the ant, busy gathering and storing food, preparing for the future.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a classic contrast.
Right.
You've got the carefree nightingale and the diligent, hardworking ant. And I think, you might expect Saadi to favor the nightingale, right? I mean, he was a poet, he loved beauty, he loved art. But here's where things get a little bit unexpected.
You're right. That's what I thought, too. You think he's going to be all about the nightingale, but
right.
He actually seems to really praise the ant, with one who's thinking ahead, planning for what's to come. And it kind of made me think, is he saying that we should all just be workaholics? Just focus on accumulating stuff.
That's such a great question. And I think it really gets to the core of what Saadi's trying to nudge us towards. It's not so much about becoming a workaholic, but what kind of future are we preparing for? Is it just, accumulating things, having comfort in this life? Or is there something more? Is there a bigger picture that we need to be considering?
Something more. Yeah, that's a pretty big idea. What could that even mean? In this context.
Well, Dr. Larijani asks a really thought-provoking question in one of the Marifat episodes. And he says, what is our ultimate end? Is it just physical death? Is that the end of the story? Or is there something beyond that?
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. But I'm also feeling a little lost. What could that something more possibly be?
Right. It's the big mystery, isn't it? And, Saadi and Dr. Larijani really seem to be suggesting that death might not be the final word, that there's something that transcends, our physical bodies, something eternal.
Eternal. Wow. But if that's true, how do we even begin to, access this something more?
Yeah, it's a journey for sure. But, Dr. Dinani actually compares, physics to philosophy and even religion to kind of help explain this. And if you think about it, physics can explain the mechanisms of the universe, right? It can trace things back to the Big Bang and all of that.
Right, yeah. But even thinking about the Big Bang, I always remember thinking, okay, but what caused that?
Exactly. And I think that's the limit, right? Science can explain the how of things, but it often can't answer the big why questions, right? What was there before the Big Bang? What caused it? What's the point of any of it? And that's where I think, philosophy and religion, they really step in.
They sort of offer these different ways of looking at the big picture.
Yeah, they offer these frameworks, right, to understand the universe and ourselves. And they delve into concepts like, purpose and meaning and this idea of the eternal that we're talking about. And I think what's so powerful about Dr. Larijani's perspective is he talks about how humans have this longing for the infinite,
right?
This yearning for something that's beyond the finite. And he says, if there wasn't something truly infinite within us, connected to something bigger, where would that longing even come from?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you think that maybe we are connected to something eternal, even if we don't always realize it.
Exactly.
So how do we tap into that?
Well, Dr. Larijani talks about this inner state of being called halat and fesi. And it's not just an idea, it's something that you actually experience. So think of a time when you were maybe so absorbed in an activity, like listening to music or painting or something, where time just seemed to kind of disappear. You felt this sense of deep connection, peace.
Yeah, I think I felt something like that.
Yeah, it's like a flow state.
Yeah.
Where you kind of merge with the present moment. And that can be a glimpse of what halat and fesi feels like. And in that state, Dr. Larijani suggests we directly experience the eternal.
Wow. Okay, that sounds pretty amazing.
Oh.
But how does all this connect back to the fable, the Nightingale and the ant?
That's a great question. Well, think about how both the nightingale and the ant are preparing for the future in their own way. The nightingale, might seem carefree, but it's preparing for the future by fully experiencing, the beauty and joy of the present moment. The ant is preparing by, making sure it has resources when, times get tough.
So maybe Saadi isn't necessarily saying that one way is like better than the other. Maybe it's about finding some kind of balance between experiencing the present, preparing for the future, both like the immediate future and the eternal one.
You're getting it. Saadi's not giving us the easy answers here. He's just encouraging us to reflect on our own lives and how we can find that balance that works for each of us. He's just using this simple story to open the door to a deeper understanding.
And this is where I think the idea of language comes in, right? Because Saadi, he wasn't just a philosopher, he was a poet. So how do words, help us access these profound truths?
That is such a great question, and it leads us to another really important concept that Dr. Dinani brings up, tamatul. And it's a bit of a complex concept, but essentially it's the process of, higher spiritual meanings taking shape within us.
So these deeper truths are always there, you're saying, but our ability to actually grasp them depends on something.
Exactly. And think of it this way. These deeper truths they're always kind of whispering to us, but our ability to actually hear those whispers, it depends on how quiet our minds are. So the more we cultivate this inner stillness, the clearer those whispers become.
And that inner stillness is what allows that tamathul to actually happen, for those deeper meanings to take root.
Precisely. And remember the vessel metaphor we talked about before? It's like halat and fesi is like purifying that vessel, our consciousness, so that it can clearly reflect, those higher meanings. And when that happens, our words, both spoken and written, they naturally reflect that harmony and that connection to something larger.
So it's like the more we cultivate that inner stillness, the more authentic our words become. Like they become more aligned with our deepest selves.
Absolutely. It's not about, trying to sound spiritual or using fancy words. It's about letting our words flow from a place of genuine connection to something bigger than ourselves.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. It's about that inner state of being that shapes how we use language. It's not just about the words themselves, it's about the energy behind them. This makes me think back to the nightingale and the ant again. Just like finding that balance in life, maybe there's also like a balance to be found in how we actually use language.
There's a balance.
Yeah.
And Saadi gives us these clues about how to actually find it. So think about, the Nightingale song, right? It's expressive, evocative, it stirs these emotions, it creates these vivid images. That's one aspect of language.
Right. And the ant, so focused on action, conveying information clearly, efficiently, that represents another aspect.
Exactly. And just like we need both the nightingale and the ant, in the ecosystem, we need both this expressive and practical language in our lives. It's about choosing the right words for the right context. But how do we know which to choose?
Yeah. How do we know? How do we know when to sing like the nightingale? When to be as straightforward as the ant?
Well, that's where self-awareness comes in. And this is something that Saadi really, really emphasizes. We need to consider our audience, the situation, and most importantly, our own intentions.
So before we speak, we should ask ourselves, why am I saying this?
Yeah.
What am I trying to achieve?
Exactly. Are we speaking from, a place of ego, like a desire to manipulate or impress, or are we speaking from a place of genuine connection, a desire to share and understand?
It's like hitting that pause button.
Yeah.
Before we hit send on that email. Sometimes just taking a moment to really check in with ourselves can make all the difference in how our words are received.
That's absolutely. And there's an old saying that really captures this idea. It says, before you speak, let your words pass through 3 gates. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary?
Simple but powerful.
Oh.
It really gets to the heart of what Saadi is teaching us here.
All right.
True eloquence, it's not about fancy words. It's about speaking from the heart, from a place of genuine connection, intention.
Absolutely. And Saadi even goes a step further. He even talks about the power of silence. And he has this beautiful line. He says, silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation.
Wow. So sometimes the most powerful communication is actually saying nothing at all.
It's a paradox, isn't it? But sometimes those unspoken moments can speak volumes. They create space for reflection, for deeper understanding, for connection that goes beyond words.
But honestly, finding that inner silence these days feels almost impossible. We're constantly bombarded, notifications, news, opinions, everything. How do we even begin to cultivate stillness in this, this world that just never shuts up?
It's a challenge for sure. But it's not impossible. Practices like meditation and mindfulness, even just spending time in nature, these things can all help us quiet that mental chatter and create space for that inner stillness to kind of emerge.
So it's about making a conscious effort to unplug, to step away from the noise, to reconnect with ourselves.
Exactly. It's like pressing the reset button on our minds and allowing ourselves to just be.
And the more we do that, the more we cultivate that inner stillness.
Yeah.
The more our words will naturally reflect that clarity, that peace.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's like this ripple effect, right? The inner transformation impacts, everything we do, including how we communicate.
It makes me think about how differently I listen when I'm truly present, when I'm not distracted by, my own thoughts and my own to-do list.
Mm-hmm.
I can actually hear what the other person is saying and maybe even what they're not saying.
That's such a profound point, and Saadi talks about this too, the importance of listening, not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Cultivating empathy, truly trying to understand the other person's perspective.
It's like stepping out of our own little bubble and really opening ourselves to the richness and the complexity of another person's world.
Yeah, and that's where true connection happens, right? When we feel seen and we feel heard, not just on the superficial level, but on a deeper soul-to-soul level.
It makes me think about how often these days, conversations feel so transactional. Like we're just exchanging information instead of actually connecting.
That's a symptom of the information overload that we were talking about, isn't it? We've gotten so used to skimming the surface, to multitasking, to jumping from one thing to the next, that we've lost the art of deep listening, of truly engaging with another human being.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's almost like we're afraid of silence, of those spaces where real connection can happen. So we fill every moment with words, with noise, with distractions.
And Saadi would say, those moments of silence, those pauses, that's actually where the magic happens. That's where we access those deeper truths, those insights that can't be forced or contrived. They emerge organically when we create the space for them.
It's like the difference between reading a tweet and reading a poem, One is designed for instant gratification, and the other requires us to slow down, to savor each word, to let the meaning unfold over time.
What a great analogy. And, Saadi himself was a master of both forms. He understood that language is versatile. It can be used in so many different ways, to connect, to teach, to inspire.
So it's not about saying that, one form of language is better than another. It's about choosing the right tool for the job and using it with skill, with intention.
Exactly. And that's where Saadi's teachings, I think, are so relevant for us today. Because he's not just talking about poetry or philosophy, he's talking about how to live a more meaningful, a more fulfilling life, how to connect with ourselves and with others on a deeper level, and how to use language as this force for good in the world.
It's like he's giving us this blueprint for building a more conscious, a more compassionate world. One word, one conversation, one poem at a time. And that's a journey I'm excited to be on.
Me too. And what's so striking is that even though, Saadi lived centuries ago, his wisdom feels more relevant now than ever. In a world that's increasingly fragmented and disconnected, his teachings offer this path back to wholeness, to meaning, to connection.
And to think it all started with this simple fable about a nightingale and an ant who knew such profound wisdom could be found in such an unassuming package.
That's the beauty of Saadi, isn't it? He has this incredible ability to take, everyday experiences, these seemingly simple stories, and weave them into these tapestries of wisdom that have resonated across cultures and centuries. He's a master of revealing the extraordinary within the ordinary.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, what hidden gems of wisdom are waiting to be uncovered, in our own lives, in our own experiences? Maybe all it takes is a shift in perspective, a willingness to slow down and really pay attention.
Yeah, and I think that is the invitation that Saadi extends to us, to look deeper, to listen more intently, and to speak with greater intention. And in doing so, we not only transform ourselves, but we contribute to creating a more beautiful and harmonious world.
It's like we're talking about this kind of alchemy, turning the lead of our everyday language into the gold of deeper meaning and connection.
What a beautiful way to put it, alchemy. And I think Saadi would agree. He understood that language has this power to transform, not just to describe the world, but to actually shape it. And, this idea of balance actually ties into something that Dr. Larijani talks about, this danger of information overload, in our modern world. Like, we're just bombarded with words all the time, and it's so easy to become numb to their meaning, their power.
Yeah, it's like we're drowning in words, but starving for meaning. It's like we're constantly snacking on junk food, but never getting a real meal.
Exactly. And that's where I think, Saadi's wisdom becomes so crucial, because he's not giving us these complicated theories or anything. He's giving us like practical guidance on how to navigate, this world of words and actually find that deeper meaning that we're all craving.
So it's not about, becoming like silent hermits or something. It's about finding that balance, right, between the nightingale's like expressive song and the ant's clear practical communication.
You got it. There's a time for those soaring melodies and passionate storytelling, heartfelt expression, and there's a time for clear, concise communication, for getting things done. And Saadi's urging us to be flexible with our words, to choose the right approach, depending on the situation.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about how differently I talk to like my best friend compared to how I communicate at work. It's the same language, but I use it in a totally different way.
Exactly. And Saadi would say, both are valid expressions of language, as long as they're coming from a place of authenticity, from a connection to our core values.
Okay, so authenticity is key.
Yeah.
But how do we even know when we're being authentic? How do we avoid falling into those traps of manipulation or self-promotion?
It's tricky, right? That's where the inner work comes in. It's about cultivating that self-awareness, that ability to kind of step back and observe, our thoughts and motivations without judgment. Before we speak, we can ask ourselves, am I speaking from a place of ego, or am I really trying to genuinely connect?
I love that. It's like hitting the pause button before we hit send on that email or text message. Sometimes just taking a moment to check in with ourselves can make a world of difference, in how our words are received.
You nailed it. And, there's an old saying that really captures this idea. It says, before you speak, let your words pass through 3 gates. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary?
Simple but powerful.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of what Saadi is teaching us here.
Right.
True eloquence. It's not about fancy words. It's about speaking from the heart, from a place of genuine connection and intention.
Absolutely. And Saadi even goes a step further. He even talks about the power of silence. And he has this beautiful line. He says, silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation.
Wow. So sometimes the most powerful communication is actually saying nothing at all.
It's a paradox, isn't it? But sometimes those unspoken moments can speak volumes. They create space for reflection, for deeper understanding, for a connection that goes beyond words.
But honestly, finding that inner silence these days feels almost impossible. We're constantly bombarded with notifications and news and opinions and all of that. How do we even begin to cultivate stillness in this world that just never shuts up?
It's a challenge for sure, but it's not impossible. Practices like meditation, mindfulness, even just spending time in nature, these can all help us quiet that mental chatter and create space for that inner stillness to kind of emerge.
So it's about making that conscious effort to unplug, to step away from the noise, to reconnect with ourselves.
Exactly. It's like pressing the reset button on our minds and just allowing ourselves to be.
And the more we do that, the more we cultivate that inner stillness, the more our words will naturally reflect that clarity, that peace.
Exactly. It's like a ripple effect.
Right?
In the inner transformation, it impacts everything we do, including how we communicate.
It makes me think about how differently I listen when I'm truly present. When I'm not distracted by my own thoughts, my own to-do list. I can actually hear what the other person is saying, and maybe even what they're not saying.
That's such a profound point. And Saadi talks about this too, the importance of listening not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Cultivating empathy, truly trying to understand the other person's perspective.
It's like stepping out of our own little bubble and really opening ourselves to the richness, the complexity of another person's world.
And that's where true connection happens, right? When we feel seen and we feel heard, not just on the superficial level, but on a deeper soul-to-soul level.
It makes me think about how often these days, conversations feel so transactional, like we're just exchanging information instead of actually connecting.
That's a symptom of the information overload that we were talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've gotten so used to skimming the surface, to multitasking, to jumping from one thing to the next, that we've lost the art of deep listening, of truly engaging with another human being.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's almost like we're afraid of silence, of those spaces where real connection can happen. So we fill every moment with words, with noise, with distractions.
And Saadi would say, those moments of silence, those pauses, that's actually where the magic happens. That's where we access those deeper truths, those insights that can't be forced or contrived. They emerge organically when we create the space for them.
It's like the difference between reading a tweet and reading a poem. One is designed for instant gratification, and the other requires us to slow down, to savor each word, to let the meaning unfold over time.
Such a great analogy. And, Saadi himself was a master of both forms. He understood that language is versatile and can be used in so many different ways to connect, to teach, to inspire.
It's not about saying that, one form of language is better than another. It's about choosing the right tool for the job. And using it with skill, with intention.
Exactly. And that's where Saadi's teachings, I think, are so relevant for us today. Because he's not just talking about poetry or philosophy, he's talking about how to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life, how to connect with ourselves and with others on a deeper level, and how to use language as this force for good in the world.
It's like he's giving us this blueprint for building a more compassionate world. One word, one conversation, one poem at a time. And that's a journey I'm excited to be on.
Me too. And what's so striking is that even though, Saadi lived centuries ago, his wisdom feels more relevant now than ever. In a world that's increasingly fragmented and disconnected, his teachings offer this path back to wholeness, to meaning, to connection.
And to think it all started with simple fable about a nightingale and an ant. Who knew? Such profound wisdom could be found in such an unassuming package.
That's the beauty of Saadi, isn't it? He has this incredible ability to take, everyday experiences, these seemingly simple stories, and weave them into these tapestries of wisdom that have resonated across cultures and centuries. He's a master of revealing the extraordinary within the ordinary.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what hidden gems of wisdom are waiting to be uncovered, in our own lives and our own experiences. Maybe all it takes is a shift in perspective, a willingness to slow down, to really pay attention.
That is the invitation that Saadi extends to us, to look deeper, to listen more intently, and to speak with greater intention. And in doing so, we not only transform ourselves, but we contribute to creating a more beautiful and harmonious world.
It's like we're talking about this kind of alchemy. Turning the lead of our everyday language into the gold of deeper meaning and connection.
That's a beautiful way to put it, alchemy. And I think Saadi would agree. He understood that language has this power to transform, not just to describe the world, but to actually shape it. And I think it starts with, taking those small intentional steps. Maybe we start by just paying closer attention to the words that we use. Notice when we fall into those habitual patterns of negativity, of gossip, of judgment. What if instead we made a conscious effort to speak with more kindness, more gratitude, more love?
Yeah, it's like being mindful of our mental diet.
Right.
Like just as we pay attention to the food that we put into our bodies, we can pay attention to the words we consume and the words we put out into the world.
I love that analogy. Just as a healthy diet nourishes our bodies, a healthy language diet nourishes our minds and our spirits.
Yeah, okay, so we start by swapping out those junk food words with something a little more nourishing. But what else can we do?
Well, we can create more space for silence in our lives. Remember those moments of quiet reflection. Those are where we reconnect with ourselves, with our values, with that deeper source of wisdom within.
Yeah, and Saadi talks a lot about solitude, doesn't he? Not as a way of withdrawing from the world, but as a way of recharging our batteries so we can come back to the world from a more centered, more authentic place.
Yes, and he has this beautiful line. He says, "In solitude, the heart finds its own company." It's a reminder that some of the most important conversations that we have are the ones we have with ourselves.
And maybe that's where the real transformation begins, with that inner journey of self-discovery, of uncovering those hidden layers of wisdom and beauty within our own hearts.
Exactly. And as we do that, our words will naturally reflect that inner shift. They'll become infused with more meaning, they'll resonate more deeply, and they'll have a greater power to connect, to inspire.
It's almost like Saadi's saying that true eloquence. It's not about, learning a bunch of techniques or following rules. It's about aligning our words with our deepest truths, with our values, with our love.
I think that's right. He's suggesting that when we speak from that place, our words become more than just sounds or symbols. They become vehicles for transformation, for healing, for creating a world that's more beautiful, more harmonious.
It's such a hopeful message.
Yeah.
Like even in the middle of all the chaos and the noise of the world, we have the power to create these little pockets of peace, of meaning, of connection, simply by choosing our words carefully, intentionally.
I think that's a beautiful way to summarize Saadi's legacy. He reminds us that language is a gift. It's a tool that we can use to build bridges, to heal wounds, to inspire hope, and to create a world that reflects the beauty and the wisdom that we know is inside each of us.
So let's take his teachings to heart and commit to using our words to spread kindness, to foster understanding, to build a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued.
Yeah.
It's a big goal, but I feel like if we work together, we can make it happen.
I agree. And remember it starts with that first step, that first conscious choice to use our words as instruments of love and healing. Let's start right now. Let our words be a reflection of the beauty and the wisdom that we want to see in the world.
Beautifully said. And until next time, dear listeners, may your words be a source of light, hope, and transformation.